All right, this video is going to be about how to wedge a form into another form. So you can see a cube here. I'm going to place another object in front of that cube. And here's something I did right before the video. As you can see, I wedged this cone onto a cube, I wedged a sphere onto a cube, and I wedged this other sphere going in a different direction onto this cube as well. And the trick is to find the midpoint where something overlaps, and then also you have to kind of master the art of the ellipse. And once you can imagine that ellipse hitting the top plane of whatever surface you're trying to wedge it on top of, for example this cube, then you can do it. All right, so here's a cube, and I'm going to, just like you see here, I'm just going to draw this spherical form, or this conical form. So in order to do that, I'm just going to drop a vertical line. Let's drop a vertical line right here. That vertical line acts as the center, if you can see here, acts as the center of that line, and then you can kind of go out from the center and make that conical shape. So I think I'll pull it down to about here. And another thing I want to point out, these little graph rulers that I'm using, very helpful. You can make lines perpendicular relatively fast. I think I'm going to go about this high. I'm just going to pull a point here. So this is my line. This is the center of my cone. And I'm going to just line a red line right up on that, on the center line here. And I'm just going to go out, I don't know, I'll go out 1.5 inches on one end. I'll go out 1.5 inches on another end. Doesn't really matter. It's just they have to be equal on both sides. And then I'm going to connect that point with the top point. I'm going to connect this top point with the bottom point. And I have almost a cone shape. You can see in this piece here, there's an ellipse form at the bottom. Now, I'm going to throw that ellipse form at the bottom, and I'll show you how to do so. How I approach this is that if I'm looking, these are parallel line drawings, but if I'm looking at the top plane of this, what is this called? A cube, my lord. The ellipse is about from here to here, about that big, right? So I can just kind of guesstimate that. That looks to me about a full inch. I'm just gonna make my ellipse down here about 1 inch, because that's basically how much of the bottom plane of this would be showing, because it's in the same orientation as the top cube. All right, so now that I put my little line there, I'm gonna put a line here. After I do that, I'm gonna divide this space up into 2. Since it was 1 inch, it's a pretty easy space to divide in half, which is a 1/2 inch, obviously. And then I'm just gonna take a line there, and I'm gonna divide this into half. And I'm gonna draw my ellipse. Now I like to turn my paper on a diagonal, because it's easier for me to kind of go through this elliptical process. And what I usually do is I'll just put little arches on those 4 areas that subdivide or make a quadrant within that sphere or elliptical form. So I'm just making these little tiny arches. If you look here, arch, baby arch, big arch, excuse me, big arch. And then I start to connect those arches. Now, you don't have to draw the entire ellipse, but I like to see the entire ellipse because it helps me understand the form. So I recommend drawing the entire ellipse, but you probably will end up erasing most of the ellipse. So you can kind of see the ellipse there. All right, now, here is the trick. As you can see, this cone shape is wedged right here. There's kind of a strong light source, so it creates a shadow. I don't know if you can see it on YouTube, but it wedges it right here. The trick is right where this form is overlapping this other form. All you have to do is overlap one shape form with another form. And I'm just gonna divide that area in half where this cone overlaps this cube on top of the top plane. And I'm gonna, from here to here, I'm just gonna half it right in half. doesn't have to be directly in half. It could be somewhere in the middle. That's all that matters. And then from there, I don't know if you can see it, but I have an ellipse that was once here. So I'm just gonna get my graph ruler. I'm gonna, again, line it up right on that center line, and that little shape that I created there, or I'm sorry, that little dot I created, that halfway mark, I'm just gonna put a line right across. That acts as my center of my ellipse. Now, how big do I go? This is where you're gonna have to do some kind of guesstimating. Now, if this ellipse gets smaller as it goes higher in this form, there's no perspective, so it's not gonna get smaller as it gets closer to your eye level, because we're not dealing with perspective here. That's a whole nother situation. But it does become smaller, so the height of it is also going to shrink, just like you shrink a window on a computer screen. So I'm just going to make this, and again, I'm going to guesstimate. So I'm just going to go up from the center about that much, and equally distance on the bottom, I'm going to go down from the center that much. So you can see these two little dots I put in. They look to be about equally distanced from the center. And I think that could be a fine. It definitely is, the height of this is smaller than the height of that. It's probably about half the size of this down there. If you're off a hair, it's not a big deal. No one's going to measure this. All right, so right now, I'm trying not to stick my head in the view of the YouTube. But right now I'm just lining up using the center line to make horizontal or perpendicular lines going in that direction. Now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to make another ellipse out of these little shapes. At this point you have a lot of lines. I do recommend, if you need, for clarity purposes, if you have to erase some of the cube in there, just so you don't get that confused with what you're trying to do, and you can just clearly see this quadrant that you created by dividing in half this way and dividing in half that way. If you accidentally erase some of those lines, just put them back in. Now I'm going to turn my paper sideways because it helps me draw those angles. And again, I'm just drawing the whole thing. It's helpful. And I'm only going to keep a little bit of it. My pencil needs to be sharpened. So you can see the ellipse that I created. So this ellipse is hitting the top plane, and that's the center right where it hits it. So all I have to do now is some erasing. But before I do that, do you see where this line, this elliptical line that I created here, hits the line from the cube? It hits it right here. Don't get it confused with the center line, because it's really close to that as well, but that's only there for, so I can make perpendicular lines. Where it hits this is where this form is going to pop out of this cubicle, or this cube form. And if I were just to throw a line straight down, parallel to this line, it wouldn't work out. Like perspective, this is almost acts as a vanishing point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my pencil right here, get my ruler, and I'm going to line it up with that top point, but I'm going to take my pencil and go down. I'm going down to the end of this cube, because that's basically the other side's going to pop out. Now this might look really confusing right now. And if this video is shaking around a lot, which I notice it is, my apologies. I'm trying out a new little area to make a video, but maybe I won't do this. Every time I move, I think it shakes the video camera. All right, so let me erase some things now. Now basically, I'm going to erase where the cube, oops, I'm sorry, I erased the wrong thing. I'm going to erase where this guy goes inside the cube. I'm going to put back in the cube area that I shouldn't have erased. Then I'm going to erase everything that the cone covers. So basically all the other work that I just did, I'm erasing. Even the cube itself, inside of it, you can kind of see it starting to wedge around. And again, remember I said you don't have to draw the whole entire ellipse. So I'm just going to erase the back of the ellipse because you don't see it. And sometimes you might erase something that you didn't mean to erase, and you just have to go back and clean it up. So in this case, the sphere comes out here, and then this cube is shown here. And sometimes you have to reevaluate things and kind of figure it out as you go. And this goes here, and this goes back up. And I'm just re-outlining some things for clarity purposes. So you can kind of see that this cone is now wedged into this cube. One more thing I'm going to show you, since I have your undivided attention. I'm going to wedge this this sphere. A sphere comes from a circle. I'm just going to get something that's circular, and I'm going to draw right on top of something. Okay? Now, the trick here is the distance between here and here is where you're going to throw in that ellipse. And you kind of see I did that before. See this little point here? That's the distance between where this shape overlaps that shape. Because there's an ellipse here, it makes it look more volumetric. Because this is flat, it just looks like a flat shape on top of something. But once you put an ellipse on something, it gives it volume, just like you see here. So, I find the halfway point of where it overlaps the top plane. Okay? I also do this where it overlaps that plane too, but each plane gets attention. So I'm just going to put a little point here, and I'm going to use this center line here to help me make a perpendicular line to that. So I'm just going to line the ruler up with that center line. I'm going to draw a line straight over. Now if you look here, that's the center of my ellipse. Just like down here, it's the center of my ellipse. So then I'm just going to go out from the center. So in this case, again, remember I said that my original ellipse here was about 1 inch big. Same concept. So if I want to go a 1/2 inch up and a 1/2 inch down, that's fine. That should suffice for what I'm trying to do. If it's a bit off, it's not a big deal. All right, so I'm just going to line this up with a vertical line that I know is true. And that slide, I'm just going to throw a line here. And same thing here, I'm just going to throw a line right here. So that acts as my ellipse. Now, since this is a circular form, I'm just going to give myself I'm just going to find the center. I'm eyeballing it right now. It's not a major deal because most of this is going to be gone. I'm just drawing a line right down the center, just so I have the center axis, because basically when you draw an ellipse, you need a vertical axis and a horizontal axis divided in half all the time. And then you can throw in your ellipse. So I'm just going to turn this sideways. I'm going to give myself an arch, give myself an arch. And remember, you have to really focus to see which lines you're going with because there's so many lines here. Give myself an arch, give myself an arch. And again, the only part of this that's going to be shown is probably right here. But if you can see, I give myself an arch, 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 arch. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these arches. And I don't even have to, again, draw the whole ellipse, but it is very helpful to get that sense of volume. And I do like to see the history of lines, a little mark making, kind of leftover construction lines they call it, architects, that's what they call it. So you can kind of see this ellipse. So this ellipse, if I were to slice the ellipse right there like a tomato, it would probably be even with that top plane. The only thing I'm going to keep here is this ellipse right here. The rest of it doesn't have to stay, but I'm going to erase this part right here. And you can kind of see how this ellipse is going right along that the top plane of the cube. And then about right here is where the ellipse is going to intersect this plane right here. See this angle here? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sketch out what I feel it might look like. and then I'll show you why I made that decision, just like this. You see that little line I put in? Basically that, if I continue this around, that's just another ellipse right inside of that sphere. But what I want you to do, sometimes you can sketch this out first and be like, that's probably where that ellipse would live. And if you want to be really accurate and say, all right, I'm going to say that that's the center of the ellipse, and then you can just start to draw in the quadrants and then try to figure out exactly where that ellipse is, and then you could throw this in. So I think I'm running out of time. This video is getting a little long. And you can kind of see how the circular form is wedged onto this cube. Once you use a little line weight and go back in and then outline where it actually is, exists on the exterior, that's going to help you out tenfold, because I could just lighten these lines right here. I could definitely take out the cube because I don't need that anymore, because the basically the circle form is absorbing it, eating it like Pac-Man. And once I take this out, you can kind of see how this feels like it's on top of there. This is wedged on that, and this is wedged on that. I'll make a couple more videos, just a couple different types of forms that can wedge in. I just want to show you this one thing. If you look at this guy, this wedges in on the side there. But one thing I want to point out, and I'll show this maybe in the next video, the central axis line is in the same direction as this cube right here. So once you get the central axis line, you make a line perpendicular to that, and then you can draw your ellipse, and then how that wedges in to this form is on the same diagonal. And that was all derived from the original degree of the cube. All right, that's it for now.